the people next to them. But it's going to be excellent. When they told me about this panel, I think it's a new. There's a lot of things happening this year. It's a crazy year. FIFA moved to Miami. A lot of things going in the UK. So I'm going to start with a few introductions, and then we'll get started. Jose Martin. I'm with Squire Patent Box. I specialize in compliance, sports and entertainment transactions. To the very end is Erica, who is Brazilian, is with FIFA, 15 years with FIFA, recently moved to Miami, and she's with players. It used to be player status, now it's FIFA disputes and regulatory applications, which deals with international transfers and protection of minors. Well, not next to her. Next to her is Daniel Guy, who's a lawyer, an author, and partner with Sheridan's sports group. He works with several clubs, players. He does all kinds of transactions. Mostly, he's also authored a few books. I think 4 or 5 books. The Done Deal, who takes you from the beginning to the end of a football transaction, which is pretty important. So Amazon or anywhere where you get your books, you can go and find all his books, and you should. Julian Diaz-Reins, and 25 years of football experience. He's head of the sports disputes and regulatory with Pinsent Masons. He represents many clubs, including Manchester City, Liverpool, and also more personally, you can talk to him after. Wayne Rooney is a longtime client of his. Next to him is Giorgio Polacco, international lawyer, EU and US based. He's an immigration lawyer with Ars Immigration Law. He's been there for 8 years, and he has helped many players and executives in the football industry come to the US and manage the complexities of the US immigration system. So we're going to start very quickly. Everyone's going to talk a little bit about the status of football and football law. Erica, FIFA. Something's happened. Things have been happening in FIFA. Tell me a little bit about it.
Okay, so first of all, I'm very happy to be here and sharing this panel this afternoon. So it's a lot. I would say first on the professional, personal side, we recently moved to Miami. So just to clarify, it's not the whole FIFA that moved here. The headquarters continues to be in Zurich, Switzerland, but within the vision of the president to make football truly global, we start having different offices around the world. For example, Paris is one of them, Jakarta, and then Miami is also a new office where, first of all, there's the upcoming FIFA World Cup. That's going to be Mexico, Canada, and US, and so there's a part of FIFA here, but then the whole legal division moved here since August, so it's very fresh. We recently moved to Miami. And I think it's very exciting. Being Brazilian, especially as I always look in Europe with the vision of Europeans that, that's the center of the world. So I think it's very refreshing to see that we are modernizing, globalizing, and really having presence in different continents around the world. So that's one side. On top of that, obviously, there's always many things happening. I will address the elephant in the room because I'm sure somebody's going to ask the question. But just to say, first of all, one of the key objectives has been modernizing the regulatory framework since 2016, and the review of the transfer system has already happened, for the past years. Now we do have a new decision of the European Court of Justice in interpretation, which tackles 3 main points. And again, we look as an opportunity to again bring on the stakeholders and discuss what is the next step, what needs to be changed, because you can't forget that for 20 years the system is up and running in rules that were agreed by the stakeholders in 2001, and now it's time to have a look on the points that are criticized and moving forward to look at that. So all in all, I think it's a very exciting moment as well for us. I think we're making history as well in that point. And there are also other points, which, for example, the annex for coaches is not that new, but still it was an achievement. The minimum regulatory frameworks for female players, which was recently in 2021 included, but now they're more into it, including coaches, and not only maternity regulations, but also adoption and other areas where we felt that it was necessary to level the playing field and put a minimum regulatory frameworks. So I think that's the points where we see that's a lot of things going on, and it's very interesting to be part of it. On top of that, it's not my area, but as you know, Also in training compensation solidarity, we have the clearinghouse being implemented, shifting from a claim basis to a distribution basis. So as I would say, there's a never boring day in the office. There's always something new going on and lots of interesting projects.
Excellent. Daniel, last year we were talking at SoccerX, and we talked about agency. And when we spoke about it, everyone was waiting for that, a couple or a few decisions by courts. Has anything happened? Did anything change? Tell us about it.
No. So, yeah, thanks again for the invite, SoccerX, for having us back, and thanks for being on such an esteemed panel. It's going to be great to be discussing some of these topics. And I'd probably say a lot of the sweet spot of my work relates to working with players and agents, and there's been a number of quite interesting developments over the last year. And if I can just recap for 20 seconds, which is effectively what FIFA did a number of years ago, which I think more or less everyone applauded, which was it made the quite wholesale decision to re-regulate the agents market. Originally, I think Emilio and others had said within your team that maybe actually when they deregulated the industry and let the national associations regulate agents, maybe actually that was something for FIFA to do. And to their credit, they decided to actually re-regulate, which was not an easy process, trying to combine so many different elements into one set of agents regulations. Now, there were more contentious parts to the regulations than others, but in effect, the main and substantive difference was, and the controversial difference was around commission caps, so how much agents could earn on particular transactions. And over the last year has been an absolute gold mine for lawyers in terms of maybe lawyers acting on cases, but also to see the particular decisions of the Court of Arbitration for Sport. There's been a very big and long FA arbitration decision brought by a number of UK and overseas agencies. There's been a German decision and lots of other court cases across the world effectively challenging parts of the regulations. And in short, and the reason why I say this is that one of the actually fundamental pillars of the new regulations is an agent's exam. So an agent has to pass in order to show competency to be able to represent their client. And effectively the exam is only in relation to regulations that are in force. And what had to happen before a relatively recent German injunction was that the commission cap, i.e. how much agents could be paid, was actually frozen, as a number of other elements. The more interesting bit, I think, as well, is that in the UK, there was a substantive decision which effectively said the commission cap was anti-competitive against competition law. So I don't think that will necessarily be a different analysis if that's arranged to the rest of Europe. So I think there is a strong consideration now that commission caps in their current form in the FIFA regulations, I'm yet to chat to anyone else that maybe thinks otherwise, cannot be implemented in the UK certainly, and there's a query about whether it can be implemented in Europe. So the short answer is we're still waiting for some more particular cases to be finalized, appeals of decisions in Europe especially. But agents at the moment can continue to earn what they would like to. They can represent more than one party in deals. The player doesn't have to pay the agent. The club can pay on the player's behalf. And so those practicalities will still be in place for a little bit longer, I think.
What parts of the regulation actually continue to be in effect? What was not controversial? Is there anything, or are they, like, for now, they're all in standby?
Yeah, I mean, there were a number of very sensible elements, which is have to pass an exam, ongoing professional development, particular eligibility criteria, some elements to do with the obligations of what the agents will have to do, elements to do with how you can go ahead and approach players, and issues to do with minors as well. So there's plenty of, I think, very common sense, very necessary elements of the regulations, and there was only probably a few % which were the more contentious elements.
So agents still need to train, still need to be more professional, pass the exam.
Exactly.
Daniel, same thing, last year, a lot of movement. Can you tell us a little bit, but not on the agency side, but on the player transfer side? And Erica talked a little bit about that, but what's the situation with player transfers?
With player transfers, it's ongoing. After the Diarra decision, I think FIFA is going to have to make some decisions as to what it.
And would you mind talking a little bit about the Diarra decision so people may make...
Yeah, so the Diarra decision was held recently, which basically held that certain transfers are against EU law, and that clubs could be liable, new clubs could be basically liable for fees. So they held that to be anti-competitive, and also that the new governing body shouldn't stop the transfer.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of developments, I think football has always been a global game. It's becoming more business-like, and you see that with multi-club ownership, which is improving things as the world goes round.
And what are the issues with multi-club ownership? And we saw it here in the U.S. But what's happening?
The main issue at the moment is if two clubs are part of a multi-club ownership, and they reach, say, the Champions League final or the Champions League, then there has to be a solution. So City Football Group faced that with Manchester City and Girona, and they've come to resolve that situation by putting Girona into a blind trust. So.
Okay. Anything else happening?
So I think from and I'm being a UK-centric here, from a UK-centric perspective, Brexit has always had a massive impact. So before Brexit, there was a wide pool of players that could play in the Championship, Division 1, Division 2. And figures now indicate that 90% of players that were available in those divisions are just not available.
Right.
Now, that's a bad thing, but it's also a good thing because it means that players at academies in the UK, which have improved considerably, are now getting a chance to play football properly at a higher level, and actually will benefit the national team going forward.
Excellent.
I think from a minors perspective as well, before in the UK, you could bring in a European, an EU citizen under the age of 18. That's now gone, and it's treated as if it was normal. But that doesn't mean that a club cannot enter into a contract with, say, a 17-year-old, which says that it will allow a player to come when he's 18 into the UK. Now, whether that contract is binding or not, in my view, it's not, because it would be, in effect, what lawyers call void ab initio, because you couldn't enforce it. It would be an agreement to agree.
And we might talk a little bit about that too. Georgia, on immigration has been on everyone's mind, especially in the U.S. What has happened? What are the changes? What should people look for if they want to bring, if somebody wants to bring an executive, maybe FIFA wants to move to the U.S. What are the things they should consider?
Well, with the growing expansion of the soccer industry in the U.S. and the upcoming World Cup and international tournament, we expect a flood of professionals coming from all over the world to the U.S. And of course, challenges related to the immigration regulations are huge and sometimes underestimated. And of course, having a proper immigration pathway planned before taking any step, I think is essential, because there are things that are out of control of anyone, even lawyers, and considering processing times, consular costs for scheduling interviews that has to match with the necessity of clubs of bringing in professionals, which can go behind players. It can be coaches or like supportive staff or executive as well. It can be problematic if it's not planned well. And of course, there is all the discretionary part that comes into play when dealing with immigration. Why? Because at the end of the day, an immigration application gets revised by an immigration officer that has nothing to do with the soccer industry, and maybe his knowledge is very limited. And sometimes when you have to demonstrate, I don't know, international recognition, outstanding achievement, extraordinary ability, that might be complex, and that's why getting all the proper documentation in terms of supporting documents and even support from clubs, federations, and experts within the field becomes essential.
Do you expect, and I don't know, I mean, just as thinking about it, do you expect, because I mean, players might be an easier category, but like executives or support or family members. Do you expect the new administration to bring tighter controls? Would it be easier so the people, would they rather do it now than later if they're going to bring somebody, if they're thinking about it? Maybe?
That's a tough question. Well, we're not able to answer that in advance, just because it's going to take time before the new administration will come in and to start implementing any type of policy. But in our experience, we know that if anything is going to happen with the new administration, it will probably going to affect a specific type of immigration, which is more the asylums proceeding or temporary protected status. And on the other hand, there is a huge interest for the United States to bring in professional if the goal is to create a solid foundation for a strong market. They need professional coming from Europe, and they all know that. So we don't know if clubs or even the federation will be able to put some pressure on the federal governments in order to establish some sort of policy that might ease the pressure or even the problematic related to visa application. But we know that with these big international tournaments coming, they have to be aware of the huge amount of application that they will receive within the next years.
Okay, and so I mean, I guess in the industry might be considered that maybe not business as usual, but don't panic. You don't know. We don't know. We don't know.
I'm gonna be honest with you. We had less problem with the first Trump administration rather than with the Biden's one.
Oh,
Yeah.
something else.
So hopefully, I would, from the immigration point of view, from business immigration, employment-based
Business
immigration, things should get slightly better, just because that was what happened with the first administration. So we expect something. And remember, Americans, they always try to take into account what is the impact at the economic impact. So they really want professionals of high level, which are able to implement even from the economic point of view, the marketing.
Excellent, excellent. So now we're going to do a little change. We're going to bring what we just talked about. We're going to try to bring it to a hypothetical or a specific case, and I'm going to frame it. And it's a family in the UK. The father is a coach in a UK Division III team, and he has a son who's a goalie, excellent goalie. I was just telling her about him. He's 5'7", so he's short for a goalie.
Hey, I'm 5'7".
We're short for a goalie, but a lot of potential. Excellent hands, excellent movement. So so the father is and he has good connections with Miami FC, a Division II team here, and he gets a job. But he also gets his son to come as a player. He was a player there, and he gets to come to the U.S. with him. Of course, the primary is the family is moving because of the father, not from a football related. And this is important, as I think Erica might tell us, the issues that this poses and why this is might be the only or a possibility of this, and what are the issues with FIFA? What would FIFA think of this transaction?
Okay, so first of all, just because I'm not sure everybody knows, but so when we're talking about a transfer system and protection of minors, we are talking about the regulation, the status and transfer of players. I have it here, in paper, but nowadays you can find everything online in liga.fifa.com. And also specifically to minors, you can also find a guide to submitting a minor application so you can understand what we're talking about. But basically, so you understand, the pillar in FIFA is protection of minors, and that means that the rule is a player that is underage cannot be transferred between countries. That's the rule. But obviously, every rule you have exceptions, and so basically what we need to check here if this transfer that we're talking about, this minor, it fits in one of these exceptions. And maybe you might be asking, but why does FIFA care? Why would FIFA say yes or no to that? So I think this, I'm not going to go historically, but basically to say that this started not only by FIFA, but also from pressure from, UN and UNICEF, seeing that many, many players, and myself personally coming from Brazil, I know the amount of players that are transferred from South America, from Africa, and other areas of the globe, they're attracted to Europe, for example, which is a big market. But the reality is that less than 0.5% becomes a professional. And so what you need to make sure is, first of all, that the player is safeguarded, that he's receiving education, that we're sure that there's not a whole pressure that the entire family is moving with the promise that maybe he will become a professional, and if he doesn't, he will going to be stranded somewhere. So that's a bit the back history of it. So the idea is, if you're a minor player and he wants to be registered internationally, so he wants to move between countries, he needs not only the transfer certificate, the international transfer certificate, but also to do a minor application. And I said for the tough questions, I have Agustin, that is, my team, in my team, the person that takes care of all the transfer and protection of minors. And basically, we need to make sure that for this specific, we have different exceptions, but for this specific scenario you're talking about, there will be only 2 possibilities, because the European exception will not apply. The player is not European, the transfer is not within Europe. So we're talking basically he could move if really the move is not linked to football, meaning that the purpose of the move was because the entire family will move here to Miami because the father has a job, and then coincidentally, he also is a good player and the club wants to register. But here again is the federation that puts this in TMS, and they need to demonstrate exactly that. Because what we want to avoid, and many times we see the scenario that actually they tell the story that the move is not because of the player, that actually is the father, but then you see the dates, and also maybe the father is going to have an employment that will not be able to support their own family, and it becomes clear that the move was linked to football and basically because of the minor. So that's the option. The second option, and that would depend on the club, but if you're talking a professional club, that would not be a possibility. But if the player was moving here for an exchange student, that would be possible for 1 year, but with a club that doesn't have ties with a professional club. So these are the 2 ones, and basically they would need to demonstrate that the move was not linked to football.
So Julian, they got past that. I mean,
Yes.
maybe they called you first and said, hey, how can you? Said, well, maybe if you were employed by the club and you got the
By the
job.
club or the player.
Right? So they come to you, and what are the issues? What are the 2 top issues you would tell them? What are the
If
things?
the family comes
the
to me.
family is your client. They come, Julian, we need a lawyer. Can you help us out?
The first thing I'd say, we need a good US lawyer, so I'd probably look to my right. No, I mean, we'd want to look at the possibilities of how it can be done legally when you've got a minor involved. So that's the first thing. We'd obviously work with FIFA on that. But one of the things that would need to be considered is what is the agency situation. Because inevitably with whatever player, but players at that age, there will be an agent somewhere along the line, even though there's not meant to be. So I think that would have to be resolved, and I think if there was going to be any agency fees or activity, then it would have to make sure that the agents are acting for the club.
And let's turn it, if the player was same situation, just US, and they were going to the UK, they came to you, and they want to, like, what do we need? Because they don't, it's...
It'd be very difficult to get a 17-year-old transferred into the UK, and actually, if you look at a live scenario, well, I think it's a live scenario at the moment, it's a Cava Sullivan issue. He's currently signed for the Philadelphia Union. At 14 years old, which is incredible that a 14-year-old can sign a professional contract in the US, but good on him. But it looks as if he will be going to Manchester City when he's 18. So that just demonstrates the difficulties there would be in transferring someone below 18. The other thing that inevitably you'd have to advise the family about, whether if you could do it, is on the safeguarding issues. As a world, as football is obviously popular, but from a governance perspective, you'd want to make sure that you've covered that point.
Right. Dan?
Yeah, all I was going to say there is that this is and we're speaking from a sort of UK-centric perspective, this is a relatively new happening for UK, because when we were part of the EU, we actually could take part of the EU exemption, which was the UK actually had a competitive advantage to some other European clubs. You look back and think Cesc Fabregas or Hector Bellerin and other players that were, for example, at the Barcelona Academy, that Arsenal were able to sign because you could sign 16-year-olds and because actually Spanish teams couldn't sign them to professional deals for a little bit longer. So not that Brexit is coming home to roost for us, the English, but I think it's actually really important not necessarily to see us as the center of the universe. This is a new problem that we've created for ourselves. But in taking a slightly wider view as well, you know, I think ultimately what we're talking about is trying to demystify how transfers actually work, and all of us work sort of right in the core of that. And at its core, you know, a transfer effectively involves the transfer agreement between both clubs, and then the employment contract with the player, and then usually a commission agreement between the agent, player, and club, and then an image rights deal or otherwise. And so those complexities and those interactions actually become really interesting, because if, for example, you're only acting for the player, you're probably not going to see the transfer agreement unless everybody consents to it. And in the same way, sometimes the image rights agreement, even though it is very central and sometimes worth a lot of money for players either renewing or coming into a big Premier League club, sometimes everybody thinks that can just be done afterwards as a sort of afterthought a lot of the time. But as you can imagine, if that happens, then the player has no leverage and the club has all the leverage. So, and then the employment contract with all its nuances and complexities and termination rights and bonuses and release clauses and everything like that. So we can talk on any of those points, but...
Sorry, go ahead, Erica.
No, I was just going to be probably for you to understand as well that it sounds maybe FIFA is like hindering the movement, but actually if you look at it, every year the amount of transfers and minor applications approved and submitted are growing. Last year was 14,000 minor applications, and this year, for what we see, the trend is going to be over 16,000. So that means doesn't mean that we're not approving, we're not letting the player be moved, but we're making sure that the requirements are correct, that the safeguarding is a given, and so it's basically saying that there's a framework to it, similar to what we spoke about agents. So it's not about not letting young players follow the dream, it's making sure that they are protected.
And this is like you would, if you have a player, and especially, I mean, if Division One or when there's money involved, but when there's less money, they can't hire Dan, they can't hire Julian. How can they be protected if they can't hire a lawyer? They have an agent. Agent training, is that the?
Yep. Look, I think our job a lot of the time in very different ways with the different stakeholders, but we're managing different clients, is educating the client on how things should work and risk. And a lot of the time, when I'm working with a client or an agent for the first time, they may think that because I'm negotiating a few particular clauses or wording that I'm holding up the deal. They might be right, but hopefully, usually it's for a particular reason. And usually the recurring work, and when I'm working with agents time and time again, it's because they know that these are the risk elements involved. And if we don't push, and if we don't, talk about whatever types of clauses or otherwise, it can really have an impact on the player and possibly on the agent as well. So you're totally right. It's an education piece, but usually it's an education piece through the trust that you gain after a while of working with people, and then understanding their needs, and them realizing that you're not holding up stuff. It's actually because the 1 in 1,000 chance that things go wrong, how are you protected?
Right. And
I'll just add to that, and again, a live example. What you're finding is a lot of players are no longer using agents, so they're, lo and behold, using lawyers now. And again, a live example is Raheem Sterling hasn't got an agent. He's using lawyers, and the same as with Phil Foden.
And speaking of good lawyering, you also need a good immigration lawyer, I'm sure, if you're going to do any of these transfers. What would be the issues with a minor in this particular situation? Are there any issues and any concerns?
Well, the specifically hypos here, it's a little bit complex, because first there is the part related to the family. He's coming with the family, so for sure he will have a visa application through the family, and then he will have to start over his own process. And again, a proper planning would be crucial. Why? Because first he's 17 years old, and it means that sometimes for younger applicants, could be challenging to demonstrate international recognition on outstanding achievement at such a young age. So that's, I guess, the first challenge. In terms of the application, the kid will be allowed even to sign his own application paper, but then they will still need the representation of their parents for any other contractual agreement, which can be with the clubs, the federation, or even other sponsors. So, and long-term planning. Why? Because of course there are different type of visas, and someone might start with a temporary option or might just go with a green card application. But then, what's the final goal? Would the kid then come back to the UK or just remaining in the US? And that's an important question, because once you apply for the green card, definitely a benefit, but you also have some responsibilities, especially in terms of even taxes. So a proper planning would be crucial, and it would need to involve the whole family.
And if I may, it's a bit probably off topic, but the other side of the department, which is disputes, is exactly the Football Tribunal on contractual disputes. And I think their immigration also has a key aspect, because one of the rules in our regulations and the jurisprudence as well is that in an employment agreement, the validity of the employment agreement cannot be subject, for example, to a visa being obtained. So a club, when signing an agreement, needs to make sure that already checked with their lawyers, immigration lawyers, that that player can get a visa, because they cannot then say, I'm not going to be able to, pay the player or comply with the agreement because he never got a visa. So there are all these aspects that I think, as you said, also being a lawyer, that clubs and people, stakeholders in general, need to understand the importance of that, making sure that the work is done before to avoid problems along the way.
Absolutely, and then there is a crucial aspect that comes back to the discretionary power of the immigration officer that might create a lot of challenges even for the contractual agreement, because what if the application gets denied and you're running out of time and the season is starting? What can you do? What are the options? Can I file premium processing, getting a decision in 15 days? Yes, but then you still have to process your visa through the consular post. And what are the processing time? No way to expedite the process. So proper planning is crucial. Absolutely.
And all I was going to say there is on the education piece, Jose, that you talked about. I think there's always two particular things. The first is that when you have the club negotiation, for example, as Julian will be well aware as well, some of the time when the club says, oh, this is just our standard documentation, and then you change a few clauses and they say, no, this is just standard and we can't change it. What they really usually mean is they're not going to change it, not because of any rational reason, it's just because you're running out of time to be able to get the deal done sometimes. And on that education piece as well, the second linked in as well is, as well as immigration lawyers, as well as the commercials, as well as on the regulatory side, the tax implications for moving across borders can be really significant. We were talking in the preparation for the panel over the last few weeks, us being in all different places of the world as well, around the tax implications of what the agent's fees, for example, can mean for a particular player. And if you are not educated in how a transfer and how the tax system works in a particular country, the UK or into the US or in other jurisdictions, there can be really significant implications that usually fall on the player. And in my experience, 18 months after the transfers happened, the tax authorities send a big bill asking for loads of money from the player, and the player looks to the agent and says, well, hold on a second, I didn't know anything about this, what's all this to do with? So you're exactly spot on in terms of the education piece, not only from a negotiation perspective, but also sometimes knowing what you don't know. You need the accountant, you need the tax advisor, you need the immigration lawyer, you need the normal lawyer, and then you need FIFA, obviously, to be able to help.
And not to put you on the spot, Erica, but is there anything for players that don't have the resources? I mean, tax attorneys, hiring immigration lawyers. Is there any resource is there any training they get to be able to at least understand the issues, if nothing else, and maybe I guess the agency get a better agent or.
So agents for sure. So first of all, they have the agent platform. That's not my specialty. That's Luis Villas-Boas, which is the head of agents. But that used to be under player status when we didn't the first time. But basically, that when an agent is passed the exam and is registered and so on, they have access to all these tools and courses and documentation that even we prepare, because many things are from our department, to make sure that they know and they have everything available. And I think even not if you're an agent, but in general, if I compare to the first time I was at FIFA and the second, you have, I would say, everything. So you have the decisions published, you have all the rules, you have guides on how to submit a claim, guides on how to minor. So I do think you have a lot of information there. Obviously, there is a side to it, which is, if it's then is let's say an advice, a legal advice, then of course we cannot do it, because at the end of the day, we are the ones taking, not the ones, the football tribunal is the one taking decisions. So then we usually, if there is someone reaching out to us, we put them in contact with the FIFPro or the Players Union, because then of course we cannot enter into that. But I think there's a lot of materials that used to be there, and now you have access to all of that.
I think you're right. It's the players' unions. I think it's the national players' associations that do have that resource and obligation to be able to help their members. Because what we're really talking about here are two maybe different types of transaction. We're either talking about the tens of millions of transaction in and out of particular jurisdictions, or you're talking about the vast majority of transfers, national and international, that are at the very lower end. Right. And on those where there isn't the resource, then you would hope that the national associations would be well placed.
Yeah. I actually think, and it does happen certainly with what we call Category 1 teams in the UK, the academies are, I would say, probably the best run in the world. So they have an education system, they explain what an agent is, what a lawyer is, what a tax person is, and they start training them in terms of PR, social media, and so on. So and this starts from, my son played academy football, this starts from the age of 8 to 16. So they're savvy people by the time they get to 17 nowadays.
So we have the situation, there's a dispute, something happens. Where do we go? Where does the player go if he disagrees? He doesn't want to play anymore. He thinks the contract was fraudulent, maybe, was abusive, maybe, or they didn't have a right to the transfer. Or the agent maybe took some advantage here. Where do we go? Where does he go in this case?
Do you want me to start? Yeah. So it comes to the very boring idea of jurisdiction. So if the player was going into the US, there might be an argument that there would be US jurisdiction clause for the employment contract if it is actually executed and is valid. There's an argument, I guess, in this particular instance that if the player is going from the UK to the US and they actually haven't signed the actual agreement, but they've signed an agreement to agree a contract, that would probably be bound by UK and English and Wales law, query actually whether that could be implemented. So I think the more holistic idea is, as us lawyers do a lot of the time, and sometimes it's flicked over, but ideally you want to be able to ensure that the dispute is in a dispute-friendly jurisdiction, maybe for where the player still is or would otherwise be. And probably more than anything else, there's two other things. The first is that you really want to try and get a speedy resolution of the matter. And that's what I think FIFA have done very well recently as well. The idea really is, how do you get things done quickly when you're talking about player livelihood? And then in the meantime, as is almost always the case, you try and find a practical solution that doesn't mean you have to go to arbitration or FIFA or the courts in order to try and resolve things.
And let me add you something. I think the implication to the immigration system then are like huge, because it would undermine even the validity of the visa. And what does it mean in like practical terms? The person can actually go out of status or not respecting the terms of his visa, which might lead to, I don't know, a travel ban, so he's not allowed to enter the US for 3, 5, 10 years, or even deportation, which can be terrible.
So if it was an English contract and the player is 17 years old, then there's very clear case law that the case would be void, as if it had never existed. And the leading case on that I was involved in, which was a Mr. Wayne Rooney and his alleged agent at the time on Sydenham when he was 15, 14 years old. he subsequently left them and joined Paul Stretford and Proactive. And that contract was held to be voidable, and therefore not only did he not have to comply with that contract, but no third party could be sued under it.
And then you mentioned agreed to agree. What was that contract? But it's a pre-contract. It's a preparation contract. Where did that come up?
I was just going to say that it depends probably, just to clarify, FIFA Football Tribunal is competent for contractual disputes, so if one of the parties did not comply with their agreement, they can come to FIFA, but for example, there's a jurisprudence on pre-contract offer, which is, it doesn't matter the name of the contract, if it has the essentiale negozi, it's going to be considered a contract, so also something to be really careful on what that means, because if it have all the elements and both parties sign and agree to it, even if it's called a pre-contract, if they will come to FIFA and there's an international element to that, the Football Tribunal could decide that there's a valid agreement. And it's always going to depend, so first of all, for the Football Tribunal to be competent, there has to be an international element. And second, one party can dispute the challenge the competence, and then we're going to look into the jurisdiction clause and so on. But there are steps to take.
And this is the fun, I say fun very lightly, as a lawyer in where there's overlapping elements of jurisdiction, because we are talking about FIFA. It might be Swiss law, it could be US law, it could be UK law. What seems to be the case, at least if one of the things we started about at the beginning, talking about the challenge to the agents regulations effectively, is that even an overarching framework like FIFA or like any supranational body still has to ensure compliance with the laws of the land. And that's always the issue that crops up. And that they're going to be obviously the interesting challenges ahead.
Excellent. Well, we have 1.5 minutes, and I was thinking of opening, if there's any questions. There's a question. Excellent. We love questions.
Good afternoon. I don't have the numbers, but the percentage is very, very high, because just so you understand, basically when there's a minor application, so the federation puts a minor application asking, they need to indicate which exception this application falls into and provide all the documentation. It happens many times that when we ask them to prove, they would not be able to provide. So then obviously this minor application is not accepted. But I'll say almost 98% of the cases submitted for a decision that are complete with all documentation is accepted. So it's a high number of acceptance. It's just there's a lot of times where it doesn't come to a decision because they don't even provide all the documentation needed. But just to say that it's important, as I said, that we're not hindering players to move, we're just making sure that the requirements are met. Thank you.
Any questions? Of course.
I'm not sure if it's a minor or not. I didn't get the full story. But in general, just to say, in general, any transfer, it needs to go via the transfer matching system. So everything is in a system, and the information needs to match. So if it's a transfer from a club in the US and a club in Europe, they need to put all the information, the documents and so on, and it needs to match, and it needs to be in one of the transfer windows. But if we're talking about a minor, apart from the transfer request, you need to also put a minor application, and the player needs to be fit in one of the exceptions, otherwise it's not going to be accepted. Well, and because it's not an European one, and obviously there's the refugee ones will not apply, either, as I said, because the parents are moving together, or if it's to an amateur club for an exchange student. but I'm not sure you meant a minor or not.
We've run out of time. We're going to be here all day. I don't know if we
Yes,
are,
we can
but we might.
talk separately.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone,
Yeah.
panelists. Thanks, SoccerX.